He said it, but she didn't reply. The air inside reeked of mildew and old ink. Dust drifted like restless spirits. Ruth edged the ledger desk, pried open drawer after drawer until she unearthed the deeds. She knew what she sought. "Here," she said, holding a folded, yellowed page. The name remained crisp. Jameson Vexley Matthias Templeton, buyer, transferred 6 months after my disappearance. Sealed by a notary's emblem Wade recognized, an old Vexley family crest thought extinguished. Flipping the page, she found a note scrawled in a foreign hand. Property cleared. Presumed deceased. Ruth stared until her knuckles whitened, then ripped the page in half. They didn't sleep. Instead, they traced a trail of names across the town. Bankers, brokers, church officials. Each link exposing conspiracy buried under forced smiles and sermons in St. Ellison. By morning, Wade had 2 names scribbled in his notebook. Templeton and Clive Doran. One held the title. The other ran the guards who trafficked women into wagons, camps, silence. They located the brothel by its scent before the building appeared. Stale perfume, pipe smoke hanging thick, skin too smooth for a cold climate. A girl, barely 15, answered. Ruth declared, "I'm looking for Clive." The girl blinked. "He doesn't see visitors. Tell him it's Vexley's daughter." Then she disappeared. Wade placed a hand on Ruth's shoulder. She shook it off. Minutes later, Clive Doran emerged, tall, clean boots, white teeth. His eyes appraised her like livestock. "Vexley's daughter," he intoned. "You were meant to disappear. Loss regrettable but useful. My hands remember," she said. "I remember the ring iron crest on the gate, how you held it open as they dragged me out." He laughed. "Memories. Funny things." Crow growled low. Doran reached for his belt. Wade fired first, clipped his wrist. The pistol tumbled. Doran bellowed. Ruth slammed her Colt into his knee. He crumpled. "Take me to Templeton." "Now," she demanded. The mansion perched west of the tracks on high ground, enormous windows gazing out over Hollow Creek's end. They dragged Doran up the walk. The butler opened the door, face paling. "Tell him," Ruth murmured. "She's here." Clenched teeth admitted it. Matthias Templeton appeared in a velvet coat, the same seal on his collar as on the notary page. White hair, hollow eyes. "You were a child," he said. "This was business." "I'm not a child," Ruth replied. "You sold her land. You signed her death warrant." Templeton glanced past him, at Crow, at the Colt, at her burning eyes. "I can't undo it," he sighed. "But you can pay," she said, raising her pistol. He didn't flinch. "If I'd known what you'd become," he sneered, "I'd have killed you myself." She shot him through the eye. Doran screamed again. Wade slammed his rifle into Doran's jaw. The butler fled. Crow barked once. Flames rose fast behind them as they left the mansion burning in their wake. By the sycamores on the edge of town, Ruth sat with soot-streaked face and gun across her lap. Wade stood sentinel. "You could leave," she said. "Return to land." "I won't," he answered. She studied him. "Crow found you. I think you were meant to find me." They remained wordless, then rode north at dusk, to hills unsullied by stolen deeds. Dust and thunder heralded spring. Rain carved trails of red across the earth. Ruth rode, calm, resolute, belonging to the bones of the world. They camped in the charred skeleton of a chapel. Crucifix split, pews torn for fuel, walls blackened. Still, Wade built a fire. Crow nestled beneath the altar. Ruth traced names etched in stone by forgotten hands. "You ever believe in God?" she asked Wade across the fire. "As a boy," he replied, "until I saw what men do in God's name." She nodded. "I used to pray," she continued, "in the camp, before the words died in me." Silence fell. Then, "Do you believe in justice?" she asked. "I believe in consequence," he answered. Ruth rose. "Stonewater must be next." "Why?" Wade asked. "That's where they took another girl," she said. "The night I was dragged, another child, 7 years old, they said she'd bring more coin. They silenced her forever." Stonewater lay 5 days northeast, a bone-choked mining town, controlled by guards who outnumbered miners 3-1. Law was a token there. Ruth didn't ask permission. She buckled the colt, pulled on Wade's old coat. He wrapped his rifle. Crow prowled ahead, wary. They found the girl, 11, pale-shadowed, stitching a rag doll in a shack behind collapsed mill. Softly, Ruth said, "I remember you. You wore a yellow ribbon." Elsie blinked. "They took it," Ruth whispered. "I'm not here to take you back. I'm here to burn it all down." Ruth hunted names. The Union men, miners who lost daughters. Whiskey pass mouths. Questions dare to form. By midnight, a strike force stood ready. Hobb, the mine owner, would be punished. They struck after guards' shift change in silence. Fires bloomed. 5 men fell, including Cyrus Hobb, who'd lived large over a town of rot. Ruth shot him through the throat, clean, condemning. Flames swallowed the mine. She emerged with ash in her eyes, fire beneath her gaze. They fled into dawn, Elsie asleep in Wade's saddle, Ruth trailing. The mine charred until only wreckage remained. On a riverbank, Ruth taught Elsie to weave ribbon from leather, the yellow ribbon she'd lost. Gift of reclamation. Summer drew dry and hard. Rivers shrank. They moved through abandoned towns, barns, stations beneath bullet-torn trees. Elsie learned fast. Gun cleaning, boot mending, survival. Fever struck, eschewed tears. Tack Anna whispered comfort. Wade fortified the shelter. Crow never left guard. By the third dawn, Elsie sat up. "I dreamed I had wings, but fell," she said. "You won't," Ruth promised. Wade watched. They reached Hollow Creek in July. Its preacher, one-eyed, was a smuggler turned minister. They asked for a shovel, for a box. Wade found it buried 2 miles north, beneath an oak. Inside, rusted key and a letter sealed WD. Ruth broke it. "I was promised to you," signed by her father. Wade signed his response and dropped both paper and obligation into fire. "I don't want a promise from a man who sold you," he said. They rented a cabin. Elsie slept on a cot. Wakefulness returned. Ruth tended fields. Colt strapped at her side. Tack Anna taught herbal stew recipes. Shadows lengthened across the land as their quiet peace settled. Then one rainy night, Crow bristled. A stranger named Marin offered news of missing girls taken the same way. Ruth replied, "You must pay." Marin agreed, not with coin, but with violence. So their cause continued, but shifted from retribution to protection. They carved a movement, an ash mark, scrawled in knotted twine, notes left in hollows, signals in code. Ruth's burn brand on her wrist became their symbol of remembrance. At dusk one evening, Ruth stood behind the wheat field. Sky ablaze, wind flat, Elsie picking flowers at her feet. Caleb leaned against the rail. She spoke softly. "What if I'd stayed dead?" He answered, "You didn't. Everything after that, it's yours." She replied, looking east, "No, now it's hers." The girl Elsie, ribbon in hair, knife at her hip, stood as testament. Ruth raised her hand. Crow followed. Caleb stepped off the porch. Elsie offered a small, knowing smile, as though seeing both hell and escape. The land hadn't changed, but the souls roaming it had. And that was enough. That was the ending Ruth claimed. For good. He traced the canyon's winding ribs with soldier precision, measuring cover and exposure like second nature. They moved like ghosts trained by the same fire, though neither spoke of the source of that knowledge. Tack Anna reinforced a narrow passage with jagged stones veiled beneath fine sand, a silent trap for the careless. Caleb stacked with just out of sight, soaking in oil, ready to light if they needed a smoke screen to disappear. He rigged a shooting perch above the camp, lashed together with an old fence rail and draped burlap. Crude, but functional. Sometimes seconds were all you got, and they meant the difference between blood spilled or breath drawn. Every movement they made was deliberate, swift, devoid of wasted motion. They knew time was slipping. Word would spread that the trail had gone cold. And then Gurley wouldn't send men, he'd come himself. By mid-afternoon, a raven wheeled once overhead in the pale sky. Tack Anna froze, body tight as a bough, reading wind like a tree before the storm. "They're closer," she said, voice low. Caleb didn't ask how she knew. He just nodded. Back at camp, He took silent stock of their dwindling supplies. 2 cartridges, a dull knife, a strip of jerky hard as bone, and a flask with water gone stale. It wasn't enough for a stand, but this wasn't about survival anymore. It was about refusing to crawl. He wiped the sweat from his brow, eyes sweeping the far ridge. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of ash, dust, and something ancient, like blood dried into the cracks of a church floor. Takana sat sharpening the bone tip of her spear, her hands sure. She didn't ask if he carried regrets. She didn't need to. She already knew. And by nightfall, Hollow Creek stirred. Rumors, thick as smoke, coiled through its alleys. Some claimed smoke had begun to curl from the far hills. Others whispered that the preacher's wife had begun coughing again, her lungs turning sour the moment the so-called witch disappeared. A few swore they heard wolves crying outside town, though no one else did. But the loudest rumor? That came from the blacksmith's nephew. The boy said he followed tracks to the ridge and saw 2 shadows working the land, not like settlers, but like sentries. He's building something, the boy whispered, wide-eyed. Not a farm, a fort. When Marshal Glay heard it, he slammed his whiskey glass down hard enough to crack. That bastard's harboring her in broad daylight, he hissed. That's treason in western boots. He's just one man, the deputy offered, uncertain. Glay turned slow, fury creeping across his face like red iron on a branding fire. He's a man with a history, a killer gone quiet. I've seen what that silence hides. Then he stepped into the street, voice sharp as steel drawn. 10 riders at first light, full arms, horses fed, and tell the preacher his prayer circle better be ready. This time, we're ending it right. At Whisper Ridge, the sun dipped behind the rocks as Caleb loaded the last of his cartridges with the quiet ritual of a man who knew this might be the last time. Takana sat beside her bundles of sage and mint, binding them tightly with thin cord. She wasn't praying. She was preparing. You think they'll burn us? She asked, voice unshaken. He looked at her, eyes steady. No, they'll try to make a point. She nodded. Then we make ours louder. The silence that followed wasn't fear, it was recognition. They weren't fugitives now. This wasn't hiding. It was a stand. As night deepened, Caleb hung a lantern on the outer post, not as a guide, but a declaration. A flare across the dark canyon that said, we are still here. Come if you dare. The dust came first, a slow-moving cloud rolling up the canyon, turning midday sun the color of old brass. Caleb stood at the ridge, arms crossed, rifle slung across his back. He counted them through the haze, 8 horses, maybe 10, and at their center, unmistakable in polished boots and a wide-brimmed hat, sat Marshal Glay. The posse came with torches unlit, rifles ready, nooses tied in perfect symmetry hanging from their saddles. Not a threat, a message. Takana crouched just behind the rocks. Caleb had told her not to move unless he called. This was happening because of her, but she wasn't the one meant to bleed. The horses stopped 20 paces out, hooves grinding dust into air. Glade dismounted slow, calculated, like a man who wanted everyone to see he was in command. Stratton, he called, voice echoing sharp off stone. You got something that don't belong to you. Caleb didn't flinch. Ain't that what they said when you took land from the Shoshone? A few murmurs from the posse. Glay's jaw tensed. I'm not here to argue history, the marshal growled. I'm here to enforce the law. Caleb stepped forward, hands raised, palms empty. You plan to kill her? Glay smirked. Not kill. Bring her back. Let the preacher and town decide. Fair. Righteous. Caleb nodded toward the noose at Glay's saddle. That ain't justice. That's theater. Glay's smile vanished. Take them both, he ordered. Alive if you can. Hang them if you must. Rifles rose. Takana stepped from behind the rocks. Caleb didn't look back. He said one word, loud, level, undeniable. No. Silence. Even the horses stilled, sensing something in the air. Caleb moved down the slope, slow, hands still raised, stopping between Takana and the rifles. She's not a criminal, he said. Not a witch. She's a healer. Saved more lives than your whole town combined. Move, Glay barked. This is your last chance. You want her? Caleb's voice thick with gravel. Then hang me first. Glay's fingers twitched near his pistol, but didn't draw. Doubt flickered. The posse shifted, unsure. Caleb reached behind him, not for the rifle, but for something else. He held it up, a weathered wooden sign, which, thief. The paint was faded, red letters cracked, stained by rain and time. He tossed it to the ground between them. The wood split. You want justice? Caleb asked, eyes locked on Glay. Hang that instead. See if it bleeds. Takenna stood on the ridge, wind tugging her dark hair like smoke. Or, Caleb said, his voice cutting through dust and memory, you take another innocent, just like we did during the war. You make her a message. And every child who watches will grow up poisoned. The nooses swayed in the breeze. Or, his voice quieted, you walk away before it's become something none of us can come back from. He didn't threaten. He didn't plead. He just stood. And for the first time in years, Caleb Stratton didn't hide in shadows. He stood where all could see and dared the devil to blink. Then he bent, picked up the broken sign, held it high. Let's talk about signs, he said. This one was nailed up by cowards, by people too scared to ask questions. 20 years ago, I hanged a girl, Apache, said she was spying. No trial. Just strung her from a cottonwood and told myself it was justice. He swallowed. It wasn't. A ripple of breath passed through the crowd. I see her at night. Not her face. Just her feet swinging. He motioned to Takenna. She saved me. I was rotting with fever. She could have let me die. Takenna stepped into full view, no longer hiding. She helped your children, and for that, you tried to hang her. He pointed at the sign again. That's your truth. You proud of it? You done confessing? Glay growled. No, Caleb said. I'm just starting. He stepped closer. You want to hang me too? Do it, but don't pretend it's justice. He turned his back. No gun. No defense. Not asking for mercy. Just memory. The wind moved. If you still think she's a threat, pull your damn trigger. Silence. Then she saved me. Jory Bell, blacksmith's boy, no more than 17, holding a bundle of herbs tied in red. I had fever. She gave me this. Didn't ask for nothing. Boy, back off, Glay snapped. Jory didn't move. You said justice. This is it. More voices followed. A mother with her baby. A rancher. An old woman. A boy with a rusted horseshoe. Stories of wounds mended. Fevers broken, lives saved. One by one, they stepped forward. And Caleb no longer stood alone. Glay's grip loosened. Ree, the deputy, didn't move. Caleb looked at him. Don't think I didn't see you take medicine for your daughter. Ree looked down, then stepped back, and then an old cavalry vet limped forward. I remember you, Glay. Camp Red Hawk. You sold whiskey rations meant for the wounded. Glay's mouth opened, then shut. You want justice? The old man growled. Start with yourself. No one stood with the marshal now. Caleb turned, touched Takanna's shoulder. She followed. No applause. Just quiet. Behind them, the posse was no longer a threat, just witnesses. You'll regret this, Glay called. Caleb paused. Just once. Then led her down the ridge. The first stones were laid in silence. No speeches. No hymns. Just Caleb and Takenna stacking wood. Stringing lanterns. Building a table from cedar and wagon wheels. They called it the Circle Station. Not a church. Not a clinic. Not a ranch anymore. It was something new. A place where Mexican settlers, Apaches, even outlaws could come when no one else would take them in. Takenna healed with calloused hands and quiet grace. No chance. Just knowledge. Caleb mended fences, built benches, taught children how to shoe horses. He spoke little. But when he did, people listened. The first to return was a man who once spat at Takanna's feet. He came with a sick baby. Said nothing. Just handed her the child. She healed him. No questions. He returned with firewood, then bread, then stayed. Whisper Ridge bloomed. Tents and stories. A mute girl, a one-handed woman, a stuttering boy, even a wounded bounty hunter who now swept the floor and taught others how to track, not kill. Glay left Hollow Creek in shame. His badge stripped, name scorned. He vanished east. Rumor said justice caught him there. Takana never spoke his name again, but she pinned a scrap of his wanted poster on the wall. Which, thief, not out of hate, but so no one would forget. Caleb watched children chase chickens in the dusk. He didn't flinch when people neared, didn't reach for the rifle. He had changed. Jory returned with herbs and books. "I want to learn," he said. "I want to help." Caleb handed him a broom. "Start by sweeping the porch." 3 women from a Mescalero village came. 1 mute, 1 old, 1 barely 15. They shared chants. Takana taught them strength. The station became sanctuary. And sometimes, at dawn, Caleb would hear voices. Takana mixing herbs by firelight, Jory laughing, and he'd smile. No longer a ghost, but part of something alive. Takana no longer flinched when stared at. She stood tall. They called her healer. Children came with scraped knees. Elders brought seeds. Men tipped their hats. But she hadn't forgotten. One morning, she took that old sign, which thief dot, and nailed it beside the herb shelf. "Why?" Jory asked. She answered softly, "Because they need to remember, and I need to remind myself. Not of shame, but of survival. She had lived through what was meant to end her, and she would never be erased." Seasons passed. Word spread. More women came, bruised, silent, desperate. Takana welcomed them. Asked only, "Where does it hurt?" She taught herbs, but also defiance. How to stand still when your knees tremble. She became more than healer. She became a keeper of truth. And under a sky filled with stars, she once whispered Caleb, "They tried to name me witch and thief, but I am neither." He looked at her, voice tender. "No, you are light." And when silence fell over the corral, Caleb no longer dreamed of war. He dreamed of herbs simmering, Jory laughing, horses galloping free. And sometimes in the quiet he saw his daughter's eyes, not in memory, but in the eyes of the children learning to heal. One day, Caleb and Takana sat with a new boy, his hands shaking. "You think justice comes from a badge?" Caleb asked. "Sometimes. It comes from one man standing still when others run." Then he looked at Takana and stayed,